Flashpoint Gaza Season 2, Episode 15. The shared eschatological narratives of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam converge on the expectation of intense deception before final deliverance, emphasizing the trials humanity must endure before the arrival of a true Savior or Messiah. Pope Francis, whose papacy was marked by progressive reforms and political activism, has been perceived by some as a proto-false pope, a figure whose actions and stances diverged from traditional orthodoxy. His death on Easter Monday 2025 could serve as a trigger event, setting the stage for the rise of a true false prophet, potentially in alignment with the Antichrist. Let's explore how this scenario intertwines with current events in the Middle East and the promises made to both Jews and Muslims regarding their lands. Eschatological expectations of deception. Christian perspective. The Bible warns of false leaders and systems of deception preceding the second coming of Christ. Revelation 13 describes the false prophet who performs miracles and compels humanity to worship the Antichrist, consolidating spiritual and political control. The death of Pope Francis, perceived by some as a proto-false pope, could pave the way for a successor who fully embodies the role of the false prophet, aligning with the Antichrist's agenda. Jewish perspective. Jewish eschatology focuses on the arrival of the true Messiah, Mashiach ben David, and the rejection of false messiahs, Moshiach Sheker. The proliferation of false leaders during the birth pangs of the Messiah is a recurring theme, emphasizing the trials Israel must endure before redemption. Islamic perspective. In Islamic eschatology, the Dajjal, the deceiver, is a false messianic figure who leads humanity astray through miracles and lies. His emergence is a major sign of the day of judgment, and he is ultimately defeated by Isa, Jesus, in his second coming. Across these traditions, the rise of deceptive leaders and systems is a shared warning, underscoring the importance of discernment and faithfulness. The false pope and the Antichrist. Pope Francis as a proto-false pope. Pope Francis perceived departures from orthodoxy, including his emphasis on interfaith dialogue, climate change, and inclusivity, have led some to view him as a precursor to the false prophet. His death could act as a catalyst, creating a vacuum for a more overtly deceptive figure to rise. Collusion with the Antichrist. The false prophet, as described in Revelation, serves as the spiritual enabler of the Antichrist, using miracles and endorsements to legitimize his rule. This partnership symbolizes the ultimate convergence of spiritual and political deception. Current events in the Middle East. Ongoing conflicts. The Middle East remains a region of intense conflict, with escalating violence in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's recent actions, including military operations and territorial ambitions, have heightened tensions. The promise of peace and security, often invoked in political rhetoric, mirrors the deceptive assurances described in eschatological prophecies. Promises to Jews and Muslims. The Jewish claim to Israel as their promised land is central to Zionist ideology, while Muslims view Palestine as sacred, particularly Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. Balancing these competing promises is a source of ongoing tension. A false prophet could exploit these tensions, presenting a false resolution that appears to honor both promises while consolidating control. The false prophet's role in the Middle East. Spiritual and political influence. The false prophet could emerge as a unifying figure, claiming to fulfill the promises made to both Jews and Muslims regarding their lands. By framing his actions as divinely inspired, he could gain widespread support while advancing the Antichrist agenda. Deceptive peace agreements. A peace agreement that appears to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict could serve as a tool for deception, masking ulterior motives of control and oppression. This aligns with the prophetic warnings about false leaders who promise peace but deliver destruction. Biblical boundaries of the Promised Land. Southern boundary. The southern border is described as extending from the River of Egypt, often interpreted as the Wadi of Egypt, not the Nile, to the Red Sea near modern-day Eilat. Northern boundary. The northern extent reaches the Lebanon Mountains and possibly includes parts of the Golan Heights. Eastern boundary. The eastern border is marked by the Jordan River and extends to the Euphrates River, though Israel historically never fully occupied this area. Western boundary. The western edge is the Mediterranean Sea. This land encompasses modern-day Israel, parts of the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and portions of Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. Religious and political significance. For Jews, this land is central to their covenant with God as outlined in the Torah. For Muslims, the region also holds religious significance, particularly Jerusalem, which is home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Islamic teachings sometimes interpret the Promised Land differently, emphasizing its sacredness for all Abrahamic faiths. The overlapping claims to this land have fueled ongoing conflicts, particularly between Israelis and Palestinians, as both groups view it as their rightful homeland. Eschatological lessons. The convergence of Christian, Jewish, and Islamic eschatology highlights the profound challenges of discernment and faithfulness during the end times. The rise of a false prophet, potentially in collusion with the Antichrist, underscores the importance of vigilance and spiritual resilience. This narrative ties together the shared warnings of deception, the influence of the false pope, and the current dynamics in the Middle East, offering a lens through which to view these unfolding events. God's promise to the Jews. Biblical covenant. In the Torah, God establishes a covenant, Brit, with Abraham, promising land to his descendants through Isaac and Jacob, who later becomes Israel. Key verses include Genesis 15:18. To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. Genesis 17:7-8. God pledges the land of Canaan as an eternal possession to Abraham's descendants through Isaac. This promised land encompasses territories today identified as Israel, the Palestinian territories, parts of Jordan, and neighboring areas. From the Jewish and Christian perspectives, this promise specifically follows the lineage of Isaac and Jacob, excluding other descendants of Abraham. Islam and the land promise. Islamic view on Abraham's descendants. Islam reveres Abraham, but its theological emphasis shifts. Ishmael, Ismail, considered a prophet and ancestor of the Arab people. Yet the Quran does not highlight a promised land exclusively for his descendants. Acknowledgement of Israelite inheritance. The Quran acknowledges the children of Israel receiving a land promise. Quran 5:20-21, Moses exhorts his people to enter the Holy Land. Quran 17:104, God directs the Israelites to dwell in the land after Pharaoh's defeat. While acknowledging this historical land promise, Islam emphasizes spiritual submission to God and the promise of paradise, Jannah, over earthly possession. Significance of Jerusalem in Islam. Jerusalem holds sacred importance for Muslims. First, Qibla, initially the direction of prayer before Mecca. Al-Aqsa Mosque, believed to be the site of the Prophet Muhammad's ascension to heaven during the Isra and Miraj. However, Islamic sacred geography prioritizes Mecca and Medina over the territorial claims linked to the Promised Land in Judaism. Descendants of Abraham's shared lineage, Jews, descended through Isaac and Jacob. Arabs, descended through Ishmael. Both Jews and Arabs trace their ancestry to Abraham. Jews descended through Isaac and Jacob. Arabs descended through Ishmael. Unfortunately, the land was promised to the descendants of Abraham. Ishmael was a child of Abraham and Hagar. When Sarah and Abraham had Isaac, Har and Ishmael were sent away, God told Hagar that since Ishmael was a descendant of Abraham, he would receive his own blessing. God made Ishmael into a great nation. 12 tribes were born of Ishmael. These tribes controlled all northern Arabia, and they became known as Arabia. Each tribe was Arab, meaning Anders. However, due to their nature, they were constantly at war with one another and others. To this day, the Arab world is still at war amongst themselves and their neighbors. All the lands east of Canaan, the promised land to the Jews, is the promised land to the Arabs. This extends from the Sinai Peninsula north and east of Canaan. The Palestinians are members of the Ishmaelites. The Torah specifies the land promised through Isaac's lineage, emphasizing territorial inheritance central to Jewish identity. In contrast, Islam venerates both sons, but does not tie its religious mission to territorial possession. A prophetic crossroads. The world stands at a pivotal moment where religious and global leadership carry immense spiritual weight. The theological and eschatological significance of Abraham's promise intertwines with modern conflicts, particularly in the Middle East. This moment invites reflection on how millennia-old prophecies continue to shape contemporary political and spiritual narratives. The current situation. The situation in the Middle East remains tense, with ongoing conflict between opposing forces despite several efforts at ceasefire agreements. Various diplomatic bodies, including the United Nations, European Union, and NATO, have called for an immediate ceasefire, but both sides continue to accuse each other of violations. Temporary truces have allowed for limited humanitarian aid to reach the most affected areas, though sustained peace remains elusive. Israel has intensified its military operations in response to escalating threats, particularly from Hamas and Iranian-backed militias. Meanwhile, regional powers, including Egypt, Jordan, and Turkey, struggle to balance diplomatic mediation with national security concerns. International pressure has grown, yet progress toward a viable settlement remains stalled. Geopolitical stakes. The war's geopolitical significance extends beyond Israel and Palestine, influencing broader Middle Eastern and global dynamics. Iran's influence continues to expand through proxy groups, while Saudi Arabia and the UAE maintain cautious diplomatic stances, seeking to avoid direct involvement. The United States remains an active player, balancing military support for Israel with diplomatic efforts aimed at de-escalation. Meanwhile, the European Union's sanctions targeting conflict-related entities have led to increased economic pressure on regional governments. NATO has provided logistical and humanitarian support, but concerns over escalation with Iran and Hezbollah have limited direct military intervention. As alliances shift, the war's long-term impact on Middle Eastern stability remains uncertain. Religious interpretations and territorial claims. The conflict is deeply intertwined with religious narratives that shape territorial claims. In Jewish tradition, the concept of the Promised Land reinforces Israel's historical ties to the region. Islamic perspectives counter this claim, emphasizing Palestinian sovereignty. Both interpretations fuel tensions, complicating diplomatic efforts and contributing to prolonged hostilities. Beyond the immediate conflict, religious symbolism plays a role in how external actors, such as Iran and the Gulf states, interpret their involvement. Messianic and apocalyptic prophecies continue to influence regional policy decisions, making ideological reconciliation difficult. Humanitarian crisis. The civilian toll remains devastating. Thousands have died, with many more injured due to widespread airstrikes, drone attacks, and ground incursions. Infrastructure destruction, including hospitals, schools, and energy facilities, has compounded suffering. Reports indicate critical shortages of food, medicine, and clean water, exacerbating humanitarian challenges. International aid organizations, including the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, struggle to deliver supplies due to restricted access. The war has displaced millions, with refugee crises emerging in neighboring territories. War crimes allegations, such as targeting civilian populations, continue to spark global outrage. Military strategies and war tactics. Israel's operations focus on precision strikes and ground force incursions, targeting Hamas strongholds and weapons facilities. The Iron Dome defense system has intercepted thousands of missiles, preventing casualties on Israeli soil. Meanwhile, Hamas employs asymmetric warfare, embedding infrastructure within civilian zones, making counteroffensives complex and controversial. Cyber warfare has emerged as a critical battlefield, with both sides engaging in digital attacks to disrupt military and financial networks. Drone technology has reshaped combat strategies, allowing for targeted strikes and reconnaissance without direct troop involvement. Diplomatic gridlock and failed negotiations. Despite numerous ceasefire attempts, peace negotiations remain deadlocked. The United States, European Union, and United Nations advocate for diplomatic resolutions, yet both sides remain entrenched in military objectives. Israel has reiterated its commitment to security measures before considering long-term agreements, while Palestinian factions struggle to present a unified political stance. Neighboring Arab states, such as Egypt and Jordan, continue to offer mediation efforts, though their influence remains limited. Meanwhile, international conferences have produced symbolic resolutions without concrete action. Economic repercussions. The war's economic impact extends beyond Israel and Gaza. Sanctions and trade restrictions have caused significant disruptions in Middle Eastern economies, limiting imports and exports. The energy sector, particularly oil production, has seen fluctuations as investors assess risks. Meanwhile, Israeli economic policies have tightened resource access to Palestinian territories, exacerbating financial instability. Foreign stakeholders remain cautious, with international companies reevaluating investments due to ongoing military activity. Financial markets in the region face volatility, and global energy security concerns have prompted policy shifts among oil-dependent nations. Future scenarios and long-term outlook. The trajectory of the war remains uncertain. If diplomatic negotiations fail, continued military operations could extend hostilities indefinitely. The conflict's evolution depends on regional actors such as Iran, Turkey, and Egypt, as well as external interventions from the United States and European Union. A long-term resolution would require multilateral agreements addressing territorial claims, religious tensions, and security concerns. However, historical patterns suggest that even temporary ceasefires may not lead to lasting peace. For now, global diplomatic efforts remain insufficient to end the war, leaving Flashpoint Gaza a defining crisis in contemporary geopolitics.